Emotions Matter. Brought to you by emaw.com. That's EMAWW.com. Your solution for emotional intelligence. Thank you for joining me, your host, Monique, on the Emotions Matter podcast. It is my pleasure to introduce my guest, Bill Doerrfeld. Bill is a thought leader who dedicates his time to tracking the application programming interfaces, also known as API economy. He works as an editor-in-chief for Nordic APIs and is a prolific writer, blogger, speaker, and knowledge center for API providers, including researching cognitive artificial intelligence and emotion recognition technologies. And now I'd like to welcome my guest, Mr. Bill Doerrfeld. Hey there, Bill.
Hey, Monique. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We're so glad you could join us. Listen, Bill, tell me a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I like to label myself as a thought leader. I dedicate my time to tracking the application programming interface, aka API economy. So for my full-time job, I'm the editor-in-chief of a blog. It's called Nordic APIs, and we specifically talk about API strategy, all the different technologies that are being released around web APIs out there. And on the side of that, I write, blog, I'm a speaker about this kind of subject. And I've also done some research into cognitive artificial intelligence and emotion recognition technologies.
Did you have to, go through some kind of educational process in order to do the kind of work you're doing, or is this something you just kind of fell into?
It's a little bit of both. I have some business and programming schooling here in Seattle at the University of Washington, and my main focus ever since leaving school has been APIs and researching them. So it's been a lot of just on-the-job training and working with people within the community, learning from them, and helping to spread that knowledge.
But what actually drew you to API specifically?
Yeah, sure. So I first became interested in them when I was developing an app. It was for roommates, and I was with some colleagues on campus, and we were really interested in solving the age-old dilemma of assigning chores and splitting bills when you're living with other people. I don't know if you've done that, but it's a huge hassle.
Well, I am a mother, so I do that.
Yeah.
I've been doing that for a long time. With no apps, by the way.
Yeah. Well, we thought maybe an app could be the solution for that kind of nagging presence that's on the back of everyone's minds.
Did you call it Mom?
Wait a
minute, did you call the app Mom?
We didn't call it Mom. We had a different name. But my developer colleague, he was saying, why don't we just use the Venmo API to handle micropayments between users? And I asked him, what the hell is an API? Why do you keep using this acronym? So it seemed like the magic plug and play bullet for any job. And after a lot of research on that project, I found it was true. I found that there were APIs for finance, SMS texting, geolocation, social media, Internet of Things, AI, like you name it. Wherever data is being transferred online and embedded into an application, an API is there, and it's usually the easiest integration method. So after that initial foray with APIs in the roommate app, which we eventually forfeited after a failed Kickstarter, I fell in love with the subject area. I was really inspired and eventually started working with Programmable Web to help them research and add APIs to their directory. They have a huge online repository of 18,000 APIs in their catalog, all public-facing services. And so I was doing a lot of research every day into these different technologies that were continuously being released, and just realized that there's a huge amount of momentum in the space. So I got excited, started writing on the subject and doing more research, and I soon moved to be the editor for a blog called Nordic APIs, which I do now. And since the last 3 years, I've been creating content and writing blog posts around this subject.
Yeah, and I noticed on one of your blogs that you had written that you were talking about the emotion recognition APIs. Can you tell us how those actually work?
Sure. So in that post, I put a lot of emphasis onto the image recognition APIs, and a lot of that is based on academic studies. Paul Ekman is considered the original expert in emotion recognition, and he really paved the way for nonverbal communication and how it's studied. And he devised the facial action coding system, which was the first systematized taxonomy of facial expressions. So fast forward from 1970s to today, where we actually have the advances in computational power and the academic background and research to support great algorithms that can recognize human faces and basically take an image and shoot that back with action units as well as other data that together represent a certain emotion on the user. So we're dealing with very basic universal emotions as outlined by Paul Ekman in the majority of these commercially available solutions. And he outlined 6 major universal emotions: anger, disgust, fear, happiness, sadness, and surprise. And a lot of the companies that are offering these services, they are pulling on additional research that a lot of academic institutions have collated over the years. And that data relies on a lot of laboratory conditioning, and taking a lot of snapshots of people in their different emotions and then cross-comparing that when the images are read. It's kind of a high-level overview of the process.
Tell me, have you ever heard of Alba emoting?
No, I've researched about 40 different vendors and different like technological frameworks out there, but I'm not that familiar with that one.
Well, this is not one of those. This is actually
Okay.
coming off of Paul Ekman's
Oh, got it.
studies. This is much more semantic type of research where there were actual human studies made on the different emotional patterns. And that's interesting that you came up that Paul had come up with 6, because the sort of founder of this method, Dr. Susanna Block, she came up with 6 as well. But her 6 were anger, fear, sadness, tenderness, joy, and sexual love. So it's funny that Paul doesn't have sexual love in there as one of the emotions, actually. When I sit here thinking, like, what?
Maybe this Alba technique's being a little more progressive and
Yeah, maybe so,
understanding of the real desires of humans.
Yeah, you might want to check it out
kudos.
because they look at the breath, they look at the face, and they look at the posture as all signifying emotional states. But yeah, so this is very interesting. But here's the question: can the analytics be trustworthy? What's the margin here of accuracy?
Yeah, it really depends. It depends so much on the conditions in which the user is being photographed or recorded with video. That can have a huge effect on the constraints of the algorithm, because if you're not working under laboratory conditions, which usually you're not in the wild, things like head tilt or lighting is going to really impact the result. One Stanford research created a convolutional neural network that was able to achieve over 90% accuracy under laboratory conditions, and they were, I believe, labeling these 6 basic emotions. And other providers purport success rates in the 90 percentile zones, but I'm a bit skeptical. I think it really depends on how massive your collection of data is. The
Mm-hmm.
more data you have, the more you're able to get more of a general vibe, a general sentiment of an audience.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is easier to take away than the extreme accuracy of an individual subject.
Yeah, and I would also think sometimes you wonder about the studies as well, like who's funding the studies.
Yeah,
So who wants to
definitely.
push the accuracy, forward? Because isn't it also possible to simply fool the detection system?
Yeah, in physics, there's also this thing called the observer effect. So it's been proven that the act of viewing a subject actually changes its behavior. And we all know that people operate differently if they know they're being watched. So yeah, I think the act of recording can definitely alter a subject's state and even influence them to possibly lie to the detection system. So it really means, unfortunately, it means that these recognition systems have to be very non-intrusive, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, has some privacy concerns.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Because, if it's just doing it through a visual, that just doesn't seem completely enough or completely, accurate.
some believe we can demonstrate different cues via microexpressions, and this has been really popularized by the TV series Lie to Me. Kind of a bit skeptical if they like how often people do demonstrate them, but there's talk around advancing algorithms to pick up on things like that. But robots don't understand things like sarcasm, wit, humor, and if they're really going to be smarter and be able to interact with society on the same level as humans, then the cognitive understanding really needs to be increased. So yeah, there's a lot of room to fool a detection system.
That reminds me of like something like from a Star Trek episode, conversation
Hmm.
between Spock and Kirk being sarcastic or and then Spock
Yeah.
not getting it, Yeah, that's
Yes.
funny. That's
Yes. That's a great
interesting.
example.
Um, is there any emotions that you have found in your research with these emotion detection systems where they seem to have the hardest in determining or finding the accuracy?
Yeah, it's not so much as like a specific type of emotion, it's variance across different types of people and different conditions. Like, for example, culture really dictates the emotional exchange. Like, in her research, Paula David in Affectiva was saying that how Asian cultures emote on the micro level with very low intensity, whereas people in the United States, they emote with far greater intensity. They're a little more outward. Especially, they'll see a different trend depending on English speaking countries versus others. Um, Crowd emotion, for example, found that on average Americans exhibit higher explicit happiness, as do Australians, and the poor Brits, they tend to exhibit more sadness. So
The poor
in order to
Brits.
really unlock the how to compare all these different cultures, um, your emotion recognition software has to be culturally reactive if
Mm.
it's going to be accurate. That is until we all combine into a collective futuristic Star Trek society.
Yeah, where we all wear gray suits, right? Because you don't want to
Yeah,
wear the
exactly.
red shirt because you always know that the red shirts are the ones that end up getting it, when the aliens come and kill everybody. Anyway,
Yeah, I've
um,
even seen some yellows die, but yeah.
so no reds and no yellows in our future society. Um,
Yeah.
here's the thing, though. You brought up a really good point about the different cultures, and I wonder too, how would this affect people who might even have a paralysis of some kind? Because obviously, somebody that has had a stroke or Bell's palsy, they're not
Yeah,
going to be able to communicate those intricate signs of an emotion.
yeah, of course. There are many subgroups where that applies, and it'll just be that the algorithms will have to be empowered with even smarter interfaces to detect those scenarios and respond.
I
But
think
yeah,
if they went with children, as their
Mhm.
subjects, though there's probably a strong ethical, resistance to something like that. But
Yeah.
children usually don't have that kind of filter system and are
Mm.
more subject to expressing things, immediately. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely.
Mm-hmm.
I've even had some daycare experts, or I think it was a kindergarten teacher, came up to me just on email, right? He was asking me how they might be implementing this in the classroom, and I was a bit surprised because I don't know if the parents at this day and age are comfortable with that, but I think they had, a positive intention, and it was just to monitor the success of the children, see if the general happiness and mood was there. Maybe that's to help establish themselves to the school board as a great classroom environment.
Maybe, maybe,
Who
but
knows?
then that's going to open up the same other thing. Like if somebody has, is on the spectrum of autism, for example,
Mhm.
they may communicate happiness, joy, sadness, anger in a very different way. And
Yeah,
yeah,
completely. One actually positive proponent of this technology, people have been saying that it could have the reverse effect in helping autistics better communicate with others, so that if they do have an interface to better understand human emotions, or something that helps train them to understand, they might be able to, have deeper connections with others.
yeah, yeah. That's. It could also break down, certain walls and open up communication better. Yeah. So tell me,
Yeah.
what do you think the uses are going to be for emotion recognition?
There's so many, and like you said, it's a bit of a combination of the great humanitarian aid, as well as the kind of darker use cases that potentially take advantage of people. In that case, advertising for one, emotion recognition being applied to static advertisements or responsive billboard ads could help target the content to people when they're experiencing a certain emotional state. I mean, you could be on your laptop, and depending on your reaction to some piece of content on one site, you might be advertised a certain content on the other site. And this is already happening with the search tracking that is going on behind, all the websites we use, but this will just be another more refined way of targeting users. So that could be happening online. It could also be happening in real world locations, like if we're going to a mall and we have highly location aware and responsive advertising in public spaces. This already sort of exists. I've seen in European countries where we have billboards that are LED screens. They might even have a camera attached to them. So they're tracking what type of viewer. They can detect the gender of the viewer and other sort of age cues, what have you. I think emotion is just going to be a part of that. And so that's going to help magnify advertising in physical spaces, which affects shopping, point of sale devices. I think there's a lot of room for growth in that kind of market. And then there's more growth for enhancing how the way products are designed. So in product development scenarios, I think product testing environments could use emotional recognition to really understand what their test subjects are experiencing when they're interacting with an object, because people don't often say exactly what they're thinking. And so getting in tune with these expressions could help gauge sentiment and then help companies further iterate on their product designs.
Yeah, but right
Yeah.
now, is there anything outside of being a consumer?
Yes, I see a lot of potential use cases in things like law. Media Rebel is a video deposition platform that already detects and organizes emotive responses from witness testimonies. So that's a cool kind of helpful lie detection test that probably can't be used as substantial evidence, but it could help law enforcement officers add another layer to their job. It could be used in things like healthcare, like we're saying, to monitor the well-being of at-risk people. Coco is a text-based AI that already kind of does this. It makes machines empathetic, offering positive emotional support as a service to calm and overcome anxiety. So if we're using this in chat bots, it could give people an outlet to express themselves.
Just sticking with that particular
Sure.
one. So is there a way then for like doctors to use it? Like, for example, if they're doing something to a patient, or that it could register for them if the patient is in pain or stress or is comfortable.
Yeah, I think that definitely could be used that way. Could be another tick to monitor, because we're seeing more and more doctor visits and health visits being done digitally. So having more awareness via the device, I think, will empower the doctor-patient relationships.
Yeah, sort of like how people have a pacemaker, and the
Yeah.
pacemaker's information can be sent, via an app, and can be read, at the hospital without the patient necessarily having to be there. So I'm
Yep.
wondering,
Exactly.
if we will also have these devices. But yeah, it can blow your mind, seriously, when you think of these possibilities. And it also, can scare you, which brings me to the next thing. As
Mhm.
consumers, should we be concerned or frightened about the prospect of these emotional recognition systems?
I think it's a classic case of a new transformative technology having a huge potential for good, at the same time, a huge potential for bad if used improperly. I think realistically, we're going to see both use cases, as I said. But yeah, it comes down to being up to the consumer to have that decision to not sacrifice their personal data in exchange for these fleeting digital experiences they might be having. Unfortunately, I think that with the way terms of services are hidden behind bright marketing, that we experience this on a daily basis. I think it's going to happen unbeknownst to the user, if not already occurring. So yeah, I think people should be aware, and that's part of why I got interested in the subject. I just saw huge implications and possible breaches of user privacy through the use of this technology. People might be okay with that. They might see the benefit in giving up their kind of innate emotive states to a machine in order to advance whatever sort of directive we've been talking about. Yeah, so they might be willing to do that.
Yeah, because it seems that what we're doing is being used by special interest groups. We're being made into test subjects unknowingly or
Mm-hmm.
maybe unwillingly, which actually I have a caller here who's emailed me in a question, which is just right on this. So we'll go ahead and address his question. His name is John. He's from Denver. And
Yeah.
he said that he is very concerned about the privacy issues of these devices, and he wants to know if there is anything now, or will there be anything where a consumer can protect themselves or maybe even opt out, or
Yeah.
control how this data is shared. It reminds me of telemarketing. Remember when we used to get all those telemarketers, and then there was a phone number we had to call, or we had to go on the email. We
Yep.
couldn't just they couldn't just
Put me on the
stop.
do not call list.
Exactly. So I wonder if there's going to be
Yeah.
like put me on the do not emotionally detect me list.
Well, it's difficult because if you enter a public space like a mall or a bar or any sort of area where you're being recorded on a daily basis, oftentimes they have a right to do that if they post a notice. On the other hand, if we're talking about this technology being used on your devices, there is no explicit government regulation that I've found that has been enforced that specifically targets the unwarranted collection of user emotional analytics. But in general, there are laws out there that prevent the unwarranted collection of biometric data from a webcam. So, and all the vendors I've discussed with in this emotion space, they have acknowledged that the technology is not legal without user consent. So even though we're going to see more ubiquity of this technology, I think we will have the ability to opt out.
And I wonder too if that's going to be an international thing. I mean, it
Yeah,
seems like it would have to be an international agreement than
it's
just,
going to be difficult to
mm,
standardize,
yeah,
but
yeah,
yeah,
really.
because I did some research into that. The legal restriction for the use of this kind of emotion recognition software, it does depend on your environment. Like the US privacy laws allow video surveillance of public outdoor spaces, which, like I said, could be used to gauge the mood from a populace. Within establishments or stores, it can be compared to laws permitting the placement of surveillance cameras, which are very prevalent in the EU and London, etc. So also EU and US standards around data privacy differ pretty significantly. And that does have an impact in the API space pretty often, where the providers, they have to decide where they're storing their data, and they have to have on-time access to it in case it needs to be deleted. So there's a lot of thought going into that right now, and this is just one component of it all.
Now, in your research, are you excited
Yeah.
about any particular product out there that you see coming forward with the emotional detections that you think is, for the greater good? And are there any that you're kind of just stepping aside and
Yeah.
scratching your head and wondering, I don't know about this one.
Right. There's this one cool use case. It's not exactly a product, but it's the idea of having a music or light show that responds to a crowd's collective emotion state. And this was successfully produced at the 2015 Santa Monica Twilight Concert Series. And they use LEDs to trigger different colors based on the quote unquote collective emotion and movement of the crowd. So this kind of technology being used in the area of entertainment has awesome implications, I think. So I think that's one positive that I haven't discussed yet. Another positive could be through the use of intelligent assistants. Everyone's using Alexa, Google Home, Siri right now, empowering them with the ability, if you choose, to have a little bit more insight into your emotion state. Could make some transactions a little bit more efficient. But yeah, the thing that I'm a little bit wary of is like what I said before. People being taken advantage of when they're in a state, when they're in a vulnerable state.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And not know about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so there's probably going to be some kind of sticker or something on every product out there. Maybe reading your emotions,
Yeah, yeah,
I
could
mean,
be.
seriously. I mean, there's got to
Yeah.
be something. So tell me, which detection device is the most reliable so far in terms of their results in detecting emotions? Is it the
Mhm.
facial? Or I believe you called it linguistic, and if that's not the term, please let me know. Or is it
Sure.
vocal recognition, the tone of the voice?
Yeah, I would say the most reliable would be facial recognition under laboratory conditions. So using a camera, it's angled directly at the face. You're going to get the most accurate result from that because we have a huge amount of data to compare to. When we're talking with linguistic, often the term now is semantic analysis. So they're searching for positive or negative sentiment in a body of text. And from my research, I've found that those algorithms don't exactly correctly identify the emotion within a piece of text that well. But when you have more and more words, when you have a huge aggregation of text, then it's easier to discern, okay, is this entire audience having a positive or negative reaction to whatever piece of content or product? I think that is more viable than like a single 140 character tweet. Vocal, there hasn't been much progress in this area that I've seen. There are some providers like Beyond Verbal, and they're kind of targeting call centers because that's one business that might want to take advantage of this. I think, yeah, I just have to do some more research to have a better answer on if it's viable or not.
And it probably goes back to what you said earlier about how the systems may not be able to pick up sarcasm. So, I mean, someone could write, could write a phrase, "Oh, I love you," but actually they're saying just they mean the opposite,
like, "Oh yeah, I love you."
Right.
The way you use your tone of voice really has a lot.
That was good. That was really good.
Thanks.
Yeah. Now, are there other kinds of emotion detection APIs that are not with facial or semantic or vocal that I haven't mentioned?
Yeah, actually, we're getting into some other very exciting areas, and I want to encourage more knowledge sharing on them. There is photoplethysmography. I'm not pronouncing it right, but measuring the changes in color caused by blood volume under the skin epidermis, like the flushing of the cheeks, for example, that can indicate health and even mood at times. Using the heart rate monitors that can have an emotional weight attached to them as well, like what we were discussing earlier. But something I'm most interested in, this is more of a futurist, but animals, their olfactory glands are so much more improved than humans. I mean, you hear these stories about a shark smelling blood from, hundreds of miles away. And I think there is a lot of data out there within the air when we're talking about odors, which could indicate things like fear, arousal, and other kind of basic instinctual feelings. So it's kind of my prediction that scent is going to have enormous repercussions because it's largely underrepresented in the field of human analytics, and I believe it's going to have some more attention eventually.
Wow, that is pretty fascinating. Yeah, olfactory. Yeah, absolutely. Like for example, now with movies, we've gone from your traditional regular flat screen to now everything's 3D to now 4D, which includes some kind of smell. Being pumped into the audience for a more richer experience, I guess. And yeah, that's very interesting because we already have devices that can pick up this, not necessarily smell, but like a smoke alarm detector. It picks up smoke. Carbon monoxide detector. It picks up. So there's something that we probably exude because you're right. Animals can pick that up very well.
And it's a huge part of their communication process between animals too, like sharing these olfactory senses really indicates these instincts. I think I have to look at studies, but I believe humans do exude similar kind of chemo signals that we subconsciously kind of pick up on between one another.
Yeah, was that
pheromones, I believe?
Pheromones, because that's what makes us attracted to one another, and we just may not be, or even the whole art of cologne in the perfume industry.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and imagine that being created, that it could also then possibly, like some animals have been noted to be able to do, is sense disease in our body.
Yep, it's very possible.
Wow, that is really pretty cool.
But getting more down to earth, I think another layer is just simple body gestures. Though variable and hard to universalize, gesticulating, it certainly accompanies human emotion pretty often. And I think more and more artificial intelligence research will aim to taxonomize and synthesize the meaning of gestures in order to replicate this behavior in machines.
It sounds like we have quite a fascinating future in store for us. If you were to make a prediction, when
Yeah.
do you think a lot of these things will start to be realized? I know a lot of things already are being realized.
I think within 5 to 10 years, we'll see it being applied to our voice assistants within the home. I think that's pretty reachable. I also believe that things like driverless cars will see some adoption pretty shortly. Other than that, it's pretty difficult to gauge. I think the quickest adopter is what I've been talking about with social media, search engines, things that are directly already trying to aggregate user data and have targeted advertising.
Yeah, it's for the consumer. Yeah, so
Well,
that's
because when it comes
yeah,
down to it, that's like the business application of it
mm.
all. That's where a lot of money is,
And that's where the interest
selling
is,
products,
and
unfortunately.
that's where the funding will probably be pumped into more.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's true.
yeah.
Tell us a little bit about you and where do you
Sure.
see your future going?
Well, I'm actually working on a book on this subject, and your listeners can check it out. It's at leanpub.com/emotion recognition technology.
Say that one more time and spell out anything that they may not be able to pick up. One more time.
Sure. Leanpub. So leanpub.com/emotion hyphen recognition hyphen technology. Basically, with the advent of machine learning algorithms, the commercialization of this like near real-time emotion recognition technology, it's going to have really far-reaching consequences for modern businesses. So everything we've been discussing, Internet of Things, driverless cars, social media, healthcare, we're going to have more empathic machines, as I like to call them, and they're going to alter how humankind behaves with technology. So I'm in this book, I'm charting out the main vendors and the process behind emotion recognition and kind of presenting it in order for other people to learn about and think of how they might implement it to get an edge.
That is so fascinating. So this is just a collection of your own personal research that you've done,
Yeah,
and sort of a prediction as well, isn't it?
yeah. It's a little bit of forecasting, a lot of research. I actually did a project with PepsiCo's innovation team in 2016, and this has kind of inspired me to do more research into it because there are these groups of people that see it as an emerging field. They want to know how to use it within their own domain.
Hmm.
And there's really a lack of subject matter experts on that are like tracking all this. Had a lot of conversations with these vendors, just one-on-one calls. And I also want to open source a directory of these technologies that I've been working on over the last couple years and hope to do more writing and speaking on the subject. Maybe there's more room for me to work with EMA in the future. I don't know. Could be
Yeah,
cool.
that would be really cool. Sure.
Yeah.
Now, how can we learn more about you?
So I think the best way is to follow me on my Twitter. It's Doerrfeld Bill. So that's at DOERRFELDBILL. So that's where I'll be tweeting about everything I'm researching and writing on. Publication I manage is called Nordic APIs, and that's my day job. We're more focused on kind of the wider economy of APIs, and this is kind of the emotion thing is more of a subgroup, just a special interest that I'm working on the side.
Well, I'm glad you're working on it because somebody has to do this, and also needs to be almost a watchdog for us. So I'm glad you're kind of being the self-imposed gatekeeper here. So that's great because we need to be aware of this. I just feel like it's happening.
Yeah,
I think it's good
exactly.
that you're doing that. Well, thank you
Thank you
so
very
much,
much.
Bill, for joining us today. It's been an exciting conversation, and I think our
Yeah, it really
listeners,
has.
yeah, I think our listeners are going to walk away with a lot of new stuff or just be very paranoid. I don't know. We're all going to like learn how to
Hope.
like not be emotional. You know what I mean? Just to avoid these detections. But, and then,
Well, yeah, that's the a potential repercussion of this all is cold humans that don't know how to interact with one another. But I really hope that's not the future. And hopefully, just talking about it will help everyone.
absolutely. And thank you for joining me, your host, Monique, on the Emotions Matter podcast.